in California right now. We're in the junkyard with the S160 4x4, and this video is going to be a walkthrough of how to reseal an FA50 front axle. If you have one of these mid-50s, late 50s, early 60s medium-duty four-wheel drives, it most likely has this axle. And this also pretty much applies to the World War II M3, 4, and M5H6. I've done this already on my M5H6, the only difference being that the axle housing is a little bit different, which doesn't affect this at all, and the joint is a Resepa or Respa, however you want to pronounce it, joint, and this one is a Bendix joint. Overall, that really doesn't make too much of a difference. The reason these always need to be rebuilt, they were built with a defective seal, and the defective seal is right about here in the axle tube, so we have to take all this stuff off to get to it. Major pain in the butt. This whole process is actually outlined in the M5H6 operation and maintenance manual from World War II, but several years ago a guy named Rob Peterson made a now, among the people who own these trucks, it's kind of a cult classic, famous little walkthrough. It was posted on his website, and then I think it got moved to Binder Planet or something. Anyway, so big shout out to Rob Peterson and Jeff Fowler from the 140-160 International Facebook page, and he also has a website dedicated to 140-160 4x4 Internationals. So Rob Peterson's picture walkthrough, extremely helpful. So I figured I'd do a video walkthrough. You have your spindle here. Obviously this here is your axle shaft sticking out. This is the trunnion housing. There's a trunnion bearing under this 4-bolt plate, and there's a trunnion bearing under that 4-bolt plate. To take this spindle plate off, it's held on by 2 shouldered studs, and what that means is these are all studs here that hold the backing plate on. But this one here, you can see it looks different. You can see how there's a larger base on this stud. So that shoulder holds this plate on, and the 180 from it does the same. So what you have to do to get these off is you have to double nut them and then work them back off. Before we get into that, this here, this greasy little guy here, this is the original hub seal. It's obsolete. You can't find them anymore, which is no big deal because they make better seals for this. And I believe it was Jeff Fowler who figured out the modern seal for Rob Peterson's walkthrough. But it's interesting because in one of my M5H6 manuals, before I knew either of those guys, it had the same part number written down, so those guys nailed it. The thing is, it's felt and it seals on the outside, whereas the modern replacement seal seals on the inside and is nitrile rubber. Where this seals now becomes the housing on the back of the drum, and it seals on the surface where this is seating. Just good to know. This is what an original looks like, and the reason everything in here is so grody, the defective seal back here, it's made out of rawhide, and once this axle spins and that thing has gone bad, it will just pump gear lube down through the axle shaft and straight into the drum. It's the same thing on the M5H6. First things first, I'm going to get the seal off because it's going to be easier to get it off while it's on the truck, so I can use the weight of the truck to kind of anchor the rest of it. I'm going to just yank it off with a slide hammer real quick. There it is. Okay, so now this seating surface is now the sealing surface. Shouldered stud number 1. Number 2. Deadbolt hammer here. there's your spindle right there. What we're looking at here, this is a bendix joint. The Resepa, or Respa, whatever you want to call it. I've heard people call it both things. I think it's Respa. No, wait, Resepa. The bendix joint has loose balls. The Resepa joint has, these balls are in a cage. So the bendix joint is a little bit more finicky to take apart or reassemble actually, but at this point we need to pull this thing all the way out. So it should just pull right out. There is your axle drive shaft. So now at this point, there's some things I want to point out real quick. First off, this here, if you have a Dana 44 or you're familiar with them, this is the same concept. This is the spindle bushing. And on the inside here, it's the thrust washer. And what these do is that they keep the axle basically centered inside the knuckle. So there it is. The thrust washer and the spindle bushing keep it within a good range of the bend of the axle. Now these things do wear out, and so I don't know if anyone makes a thrust washer replacement for these, and I know no one makes the spindle bushing at this point, but I have two new old stock ones, so I'm trying to work out a deal with somebody to duplicate them. I think as long as you had like a mill or something, it wouldn't be too hard, but I don't, so that's where we're at right now. Alright, so I'm planning in the near future, once I get this thing back to Texas, to fully tear this thing down again. I know a lot of people use cornhead grease and stuff for these. For this trip, I'm just going to use grease. And the reason being is that since I know I'm going to be taking it apart again, I'm not putting in a permanent fix. And the other thing I want to do is a lot of the going down the road shutter and stuff that you have with these old four-wheel drive front axles, a lot of it is like bearing preload and, you know, just worn out components, and I'm not going to be able to address that until I get it home and I have. Alright, so another thing with the like Dana axles, in these Trunnion bearing caps there are shims, and that adjusts the preload of the bearings, you know, the tightness of the axle and everything. So I need to get some of those like replacements CNC cut, because I don't know of anybody who makes those still. And since I don't have those, or a bearing shim pack, or a, you know, assortment to choose from, I can't sit here and adjust bearing preload. So I just have to go with what I've got right now. That does save me a lot of time with like excessively cleaning everything, but I still have to get quite a bit done, because, you know, you don't want to just invite disaster. Man, someone is weeding in a storm up there. So while I've got all this stuff soaking in penetrant, I've got the zipper for the boot and the bolts for the bands that hold the axle boot on. I've got the steering pin soaking in the juice and this brake hose. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to split the trunnion here. The reason I have to do that, the reason all this has to come off to get that axle seal out, there's a bell here. You can't get in there to the axle seal or put another one in without that removed. So let's get after it. You may notice that I used a hammer and I knocked around this thing until it came loose and I could pull it off. The reason I do that is because these shims are in here, and if I just stick a screwdriver or something in there and try to yank it up, I'm going to destroy this shim. I'm going to be very careful with these shims. And it looks like the top only has a very, very thin one. Alright, so this is the only shim I could find on the top. What you're going to want to do with these, as soon as you take this off, and one thing I like to either travel with or at home, I have a giant thing of Ziploc bags. Just put them in a Ziploc bag and label it. Okay, so here you can see this is the trunnion bearing on top. So the housing splits here and here, and then you know, it just clamps the bearing race in there. So about to pull that all apart, but we've got to get the bottom bearing off now. Alright, so I'm going around here and loosening up these trunnion housing bolts, and the race for the bottom trunnion bearing plane just fell right out of there. As I take these off, I'm just dunking them straight into a little tub of old gas so I can clean them all up. I'm going to put this one up here real quick, just thread it on there to hold stuff together because this last one, it's got me bending way over and this whole thing might fall apart while I've got my head upside down. Take this guy off. I'm sure my knee is in the way the whole time. Okay. There's the outside of the trunnion housing. As you can see, it's very clean. Your trunnion bearings, they all look to be in pretty great shape. Alright, so the next step is to get the trunnion bell out of here. We can't get the back of the trunnion housing out without that. We can't get the trunnion oil seal out of there. And looking by the back of this thing, it's still in great shape, which is good because the 108 310H seal is a unobtainable seal, but found a modern replacement for it with some modification. We've got to get this disconnected, the steering disconnected, and we have to pull the boot off of here, and then I'll show you what we're up against as far as getting this thing off of here. Alright, well, the camera died while I was taking the boot off. Here's the boot. It's actually, as dirty as it is, it's actually in pretty nice shape. It's reusable. I'm going to clean it out a little bit, shine up that zipper, get all these seeds and stuff out of it. Anyway, the trunnion housing, we need to get, I'm going to zip tie it across here or wire it up so it stays upright like this. The part that we have to remove is this bell, and to remove it we've got to take these bolts off here, and then usually you have to take like a chisel or something and pound it into here to get it to separate. Alright, so I've got the boot off, got everything off, and I've got these nuts off. So what I gotta do is go around this crack here with cold chisel and just separate it. And I've actually found some witness marks here where somebody has struck it already with a chisel. So this has been apart already, which may be working in my favor because it may come apart easier. That said, I did hit it one time and it looks like it's already separating. So this job might be easier than I've had it in the past. Oh yeah. this is nice. Oh man, that's the easiest that's ever happened for me. Okay. So, this is what we're working with. That's the seal we need to get out of there. That's what leaks on these and what destroys all the brakes. Alright, so I gotta yank that out with a slide hammer, put a new one in, and then clean this all up and put it all back together. And there it is out. So now I gotta clean up this hole here a little bit of nonsense in there from working it out. So I'll clean that out and then I'm going to put the new seal in. Okay, so if you're doing one of these axles, the new seal, not rawhide, nitrile rubber. Now, let's see if I got something that size to drive her in there. I think I got a big socket. Oh, nice. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close. So, this is actually the bud socket. This is for the rear wheels. So, this should drive it in there. Just use a dead blow hammer. Now that she's kind of in there, I can use a bit of a punch here. Okay, she's seated in there. I can start putting all this crap back together. Alright, so I'm fighting a dying battery on a camera, but I figured out a thing, so I think I've got it figured out so it won't die anymore. But I got the bell back on, I cleaned everything up as much as I can. Like I said before, I'll be taking this apart at home and just cleaning everything meticulously at some point. But I just need to get the seal, I needed to get the seal change in here so that when I drive it back to Texas, it's not leaking out the shaft and destroying the brakes that I just paid to have relined and then rebuilt everything else. So that said, on the reassembly, there's one thing that you actually need to make your life so much easier, and it is trunnion alignment rods, whatever you want to call them. I know I referenced the Peterson walkthrough. He welded up some rods, but I saw on Binder Planet some guy who was working on an M5H6 made these. So I made some when I did my M5H6 and it works great. And it holds this all in position while you're putting it all back together. I'm gonna put a link to the Peterson walkthrough and the dimensions of these in the description for the video. I don't know them offhand right now, but it's a lifesaver and easy to make on your own. There's two nuts holding the bell on right now. Obviously the bell will stay there by itself, but I tightened it down with those two belts to get it completely seated. And when you put this bell back in, be sure to put some anti-seize on it. I realized I wasn't the first person who had this apart since it left the factory, and I was very thankful when I found some remnants of anti-seize on the inside, which is why I got this thing apart so easily. You may be noticing I'm very self-conscious about it, but this is not as clean as I would like to have it, especially when my motto is everything worth doing is worth overdoing. But I'm in a junkyard in Northern California, 45 minutes from any parts store. I don't have a parts washer. I have a tub, some rags, and a can of old stinky gas that I've been using to clean this stuff up with. So at least I'm living up to the bare knuckle part of it. Once I get it right in position that I want it, tighten these up. So I run these nuts out and tighten them up against this thing so it's pushing out on it, so it's holding it in place. Get you. See, that's what she looks like. The tool set up. Got this bell cleaned out, and these trunnion bearings are packed. So, on to the next step. Now, when you put this on here, there's a little thing on there. Of course, I could have cleaned it better. It says top. So that's going to help you align it correctly. Man, look how easy that is. Oh my God. Why make it hard on yourself? So the first bolts I'm putting in on this are the top two and the bottom two. And the reason I'm doing it like this is because the bearing race for the bottom won't stay in unless this is tight enough to hold it. So the bearing race in question is right here. Slather some grease in there. Now the weight of the grease right now is holding it, but I want to get it tightened in there quick before it decides to jump ship on me. Alright, so now that that's tightened in there, let me tighten the top real quick. Get a little more love to the bottom there. Let's slip it a little bit. So for the bottom, just to make sure it's totally seated in there, I'm going to put the bottom plate and the shim pack on. Get a good gob of grease on there. Okay, so at this point, the trunnion housing is centered on itself, so I can take these off. And it may seem like, okay, well, for use that thing for like 5 minutes, I can probably just hold this thing up there and get away with just doing that without making this tool. And it's, I mean, you can, but once you try doing that, these tools will make such a difference. You'll, believe me, you will be a believer. So with this process, with the FA50 front axle, this whole thing that I'm doing right now, getting apart can be a bear sometimes. This one has been the easiest one I've ever had to take apart. The second hardest part is just getting it nice and clean. And this is not as clean as I want it, but it's as clean as I can pretty much get it out here in the field. So putting it back together, especially if you have the alignment tools made and ready, it's really not that bad. Top shim. If for some reason you mix up the, now this will only happen on the passenger side because the driver's side has the steering arm on it, but the thing that differentiates the top trunnion bearing cover from the bottom, the top one has a zerk. The bottom one does not have a zerk because that bearing will naturally get more oil and grease just from gravity. So put a little grease on the inside of that just for grins. Maybe that's too much grease. Who's to say? What are you, the grease police? Yeah, a lot of grease came out the sides, but at least you know that it filled up every cavity on the inside too. And I just stepped on a big booger of grease on my boot. That's gonna be there the rest of my life. A little bit of extra persuasion. Because it doesn't really matter if you have the right shims in there if you don't tighten it down all the way. Okay. So she's nice and tight. That's how you want it. And I can feel the wiper, the 108 310H wiper gasket in there. It's oil seal working like a champ. I've got to put the rest of the bell bolts in. One thing to remember on the bell is that these things go on the sides like this. They're very important too because their entire purpose, this one you can see is bent, something happened there, but their purpose is to hold the boot out so it doesn't just cringe up and crumple down into the knuckle. It's supposed to hold it out. So gotta make sure you have that. Okay. So here goes the axle. This is a sealing surface for the axle seal, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of grease on there so it's less likely to tear. But first, now I did not totally clean this out because where these balls are, I figured taking it apart out here in the junkyard, I'd be more likely to get more dirt into it than out of it. And so I'm just gonna pack grease in there, fill all the voids, and that's gonna be good enough for now. Like I said, I'm gonna take this thing apart later on in Texas, just really get anal retentive with it. But the other thing is that I don't have the lubricant that I wanted for this knuckle. There's a guy on YouTube who restores old Jeeps, and he has his own lubricant line. His name on YouTube is Metal Shaper, and he has this stuff that he's demonstrated on his channel called, I don't know what it's called, but he uses it for knuckles, and he says it's the best thing. So that's what I'm gonna end up getting for this eventually. I just didn't have time to order it before I came up here to do this. So I got a lot of the old grease out of here, but I did not completely get inside and get everything out, which I don't think is the end of the world. She's already tightening up with this grease. Good thing I brought a bunch of tubs of grease along. Alright, a lot of this is going to squirt out, but alright. Oh, if only I had a spindle. Here's a spindle. Spindle's pretty much as clean as I can get it. That's a spindle bushing I'm talking about. This one doesn't look too bad, but there is some wear on it. I can see some stuff in there. So that's a concern, but you can tell when they go bad because you can actually hear the knuckle knocking against this plate or the back plate, depending on the thrush washer or the spindle. Now, when you put the spindle on, this here goes at the bottom. It's a drain, actually. So getting this brake hose out of here before I get everything back together will make my life a lot easier. Oh shit. Well, the zipper came off there just after I got it all done. So I'm gonna flip the zipper around to the bottom where it's supposed to be. Alright, so steering arm. So this steering bolt that goes in the arm back here was missing a zerk and it was on upside down. I'm guessing to keep the dirt out of it or something. So I'm gonna pack some grease on it in the hole here. Then when I get into town, I'll get a zerk for it. Boom. All right. All right. Now we're looking at the brake drum on the inside, obviously. Getting ready to put this thing in. I've had this one turned, so obviously. I'm gonna clean this all off. I don't think there's any residue still on there, but gotta be safe. So now I've got to pack the inner bearing and put the seal in. So here's the inner bearing, and this is the seal. 36220. That's the SKF Chicago rawhide number for it. And so this one will go right in here and then seal on this. But first, I've got to pack this bearing. Fresh grease. Now the outer bearing. Man, finally. There, I thought the gold of the grade 8s would be a nice accent piece. So that's the FA50, the hub end, the wheel end reseal. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a messy job. Bring a lot of grease. I've already gone through a tub and a half of grease just on this end. So I'm gonna have to get some more grease before I hit the other one. But like and subscribe if you dig this kind of thing, and I'll see you on the next video.